Hello, everyone. Welcome to the session. My name is Yana Zorina. I'm a postdoctoral fellow in the pharmacology department, and this is Dr. Cagan, which you have heard this morning. And we will be the moderators of the Biotech from Academia to Commercialization session. I would just like to quickly remind you that we have the SINAInnovations Wi-Fi network in here, which you can use to connect to the SINAInnovations website. And you can also find the SINAInnovations on Twitter and send us your questions, and we'll try to get them to them if we have time. We have a great panel here today, so let me just briefly introduce the panelists and not take up too much of their time, and then they'll tell us more about themselves. We have Dr. George Yancopoulos, the President and Chief Scientific Officer of Regeneron Pharmaceuticals, Dr. Colin Goddard, Chairman and CEO of Coferon, James McCullough, CEO of Exosome, and Dr. Laura Benjamin, who moved from Harvard to lead the angiogenesis team at Eli Lilly.
All right, thank you. And thanks for coming to this session. Thank you guys for coming. This should be interesting. So I'm going to make a few general comments, and then I'm going to finish with a question and also allow you guys to elaborate a bit on your experiences. And so according to my notes here, pharma and academia, in fact, we do need each other. On the pharma side, and it would be a little arrogant for me to go on too long on this, so I'll keep it short. The costs of clinical trials are rising, and we just saw some of the data on that. This is an important point. And so because of that, the risks are increasing. In fact, for example, one cancer that my lab focuses on, colorectal cancer, has about a 3% success rate. And honestly, if I took 100 kinase inhibitors and gave them to colorectal cancer patients, we could probably get 3 of them approved at random. So that's a problem because it indicates that we've got some issues with our models. But of course, I'm going to talk mostly to the academics here and turn this around. And one of the most difficult topics that I find is teaching academics, and that includes myself, how to commercialize the research and whether we should do it. Many of us think that we know how to do it, and that's the first barrier, because at least certainly when I started, I had no idea, but I thought I did. Many of us find the whole topic intimidating. That too is a problem, and I have to say that Sinai has done really an excellent job, and I'm saying from personal experience, in guiding us through those waters. Some of us don't like the concept. This too has come up, and I can only say to that this is a position that should probably be explained to taxpayers. And also in the conversations we've had this morning, I also want to emphasize that there are decisions that need to be made early on, and we haven't really talked about, when you're deciding that, for example, and that's a topic today, of how to commercialize, for example, a drug. So, for example, let's talk about choosing libraries. As an academic, of course, I want to choose a library that's as broad as possible, covers as much chemical space. But in pharma, they don't think that way. They think in terms of covering druggable space, trying to stay with compounds that the FDA would actually approve, but that has its own problems in terms of identifying patentable chemical space. And if you don't know what a patentable chemical space is, if you don't know what the problems are of using, for example, FDA-approved libraries and why that has IP issues and so on, then probably it's a good idea to learn those before you begin the screens, if your goal is to bring drugs into the clinics. These can be learned. Even I can learn them. And it's actually, I find it's really a fascinating journey to do this sort of thing. So I'll finish my comments here by saying that maybe the biggest sea change that we as academics have to learn is that there's a difference in the goal of basic versus translational research. In basic research, mechanism is king. And certainly I spent many years thinking about mechanism. If you get mechanism, you win. In translational research, of course, therapeutics are king. And if you don't have mechanism, but you have a therapeutic, you win. And if you have mechanism and you don't have a therapeutic, you lose. I said that right. And so that is also a sea change in attitude as well. And actually, Dennis said it very well, that the purpose of translational research at a medical school is, for the most part, to help patients. And that is an important goal to keep in mind. So our goal in this panel, when I thought about how we can summarize it, is to ask the question, how can we improve our ability to translate the research that we're doing in our labs? And so a question to you guys, and it's a broad question because I'm going to use it as an excuse to ask you to talk a little bit about your background and your biology, is what are your stories? How did you find the core technologies that started your companies, except in Laura's case? And how did you fund the companies originally? And basically, can you give us a short statement of how you got started? And I know, George, you have a particularly interesting, you were one of the pioneers in all of this. So we'd love to hear how you got started in this. Please.
It's my turn. It's funny to be referred to as a pioneer. It seems like just yesterday. But Ross is right. I got started about almost 25 years ago now, 88, 89, with my partner Len Schleifer. We did something that I guess is sort of unusual. We started from scratch, and about 5 of us at the time started a biotechnology company. We had great dreams. We wanted to do translational work. We wanted to keep it very academic-like. We wanted to focus and stay with the science and with the mechanism and see if we could use that to build repeatable business, a business that could do it over and over again. The first thing we learned was that we didn't know what we needed to know in order to succeed. We struggled and failed a lot. It took a long time to get to where we are now. And I think a lot of it, and I heard Dr. Edelman's talk just before the break, and his point about admitting that, we all make mistakes, and one of the most important things is learning from those mistakes and trying to figure out how to do it better. And I think we have learned quite a bit. We've gone from, as I said, the 4 or 5 of us who got involved in starting the company in the late 80s, to now we have about 2,000 employees. We're the 6th largest biotech company in the world. We think we've brought important medicines to people and made a difference in people's lives, ranging from, we have an approval in an orphan drug disease where our drug we think makes a real difference, to just this year launching one of the top 5 blockbusters in the history of the biotech industry for a blinding eye disease. And I think that along the way, what we've seen is that what's worked for us is to stick quite a bit with the academic model. We believe in the science, and we believe that you can get, as you said, and there have been lots of examples of it, of therapeutics without mechanism and without science. But I'm not sure that if you do that, you can do that again. And our goal was to build a structure and a system that could over and over again produce successes and bring drugs to patients. And I think that we've started to figure out how to do that. And so all of our stories, they start with mechanism-based. They start with core technologies that we've developed at Regeneron. I think that that's very unusual. All of our discoveries and all of our therapeutics, they come from stories that we grew in-house. That said, they all grew via important collaborations with basic scientists all over the world, including back when Laura Benjamin was a scientist in academia. We worked with her, and we worked with, over the years, probably hundreds in different areas. And those have, including Scott Friedman, who invited me to the panel. And those sorts of basic science interactions, I think they keep us in the game, and they help make sure that we have game. And we learn a lot, we cross-fertilize, and that's how we've built our stories. So we haven't really licensed in too much, but we're constantly trying to maintain our academic nature and our science capabilities, and a key aspect of that is the ongoing scientific relationships that we try to have with academics. So we really consider ourselves, an academic institution with a twist, and by maintaining the strong ties, both the internal spirit, the commitment that both Len and I had from the very early days at the company through what we are now, we think that that's our strength, and that's what makes us unique, and hopefully keeps us to have this advantage that allows us to have reproducible successes.
Yeah, you guys have a pretty amazing company. Jim?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for allowing me to come here and talk to you. And one of the things that I noticed when I look around the room is there are a lot of young faces here, which is great, because this is, I'm an eternal optimist, but I think this is an incredible time in history, especially with the genetic revolution that's going on. And it's following the classic technology cycle where you have the discovery of the human genome, and then you have a lot of early adopters, you have a lot of ideas that come out. And then suddenly we get around to this period where we have instruments we didn't used to have before. We have a regulatory environment which is evolving. We have a reimbursement environment. We have a general clinical awareness. And I think we're reaching that peak translation period right now in genetics. We're certainly seeing it at Exosome Diagnostics, which I'll talk about in a minute. But there's so many opportunities in drug development, in diagnostics. A lot of them are going on here. And you've got a fantastic resource, and it's called the Technology Transfer Office and the Business Development. And you should use them and talk to them because they have a lot of experience in taking some of the discoveries that you have, some of the unique individual problems that you have, and figuring out how to guide them into that translational path, which eventually leads to financing, product development, and then ultimately to dealing with some specific clinical utility question. We're working with Terry Willie's group. She's been fantastic, and we're slowly building up multiple relationships in the Mount Sinai community, and it's been incredibly productive for us. We're a New York City-based biotech company. We're actually located up at the Lasker Biomedical Building on 166th Street. Makes us a little bit unique. Most of the biotech companies in our space are either in Boston or in San Diego. But that gives us also a huge advantage because I can get on the subway or in a taxi and I can hit a lot of the major medical institutions in New York City. And also the huge resource we have here in New York City is that this is where a lot of the money is, which is good. And one of the things I would highly encourage you all to do as researchers or clinicians is go and attend some of the venture conferences or the investment banking conferences that go on in New York, because it will give you a view towards what ultimately all this activity leads to, how it gets financed, which is critical, and how it gets translated into individual products, ultimately, which go into the clinic. But you know, I started out at a very grassroots entrepreneurial level. There were two of us, my chief science officer, Dr. Wayne Comper, who's in the audience someplace here, and I started looking at different technologies at different universities. We ended up at Massachusetts General Hospital, where there was a group of young researchers. They were in their late 20s. And they had discovered that they could extract microvesicles. These are lipid bilayer compartments, which are exocytosed by most cells into all body fluids, and they contain virtually the entire transcriptome. And what was really interesting to me is that they were pulling out a disease-specific transcript out of 10-year-old biobanked serums in brain cancer. They're actually pulling out EGFR variant 3, which is a fusion mutation specific for glioblastoma, out of 10-year-old multiple freeze-thawed biobank samples. And I said, wow, this is really cool. So we went to the Technology Transfer Office. We started funding that research group on a sponsored research agreement, relatively small amount of money. And we got enough data collected to the point that we could actually attract venture capital money, and we did a large Series A financing 2 years ago. We're now doing a Series B financing, and we've busted through a lot of the basic barriers in terms of understanding how do we translate this into a product. But the critical function for us was developing a collaboration with the university, with the Technology Transfer Office, and also spending a lot of time with our academic partners. What was amazing to me was the young research group. One of the reasons they were interested in working with us is because they had trouble getting grant financing. which was amazing to me. So we ended up becoming the primary financing source through an equity-based mechanism to drive that research forward. We're now getting larger grant financing now, but that group actually ended up leaving Massachusetts General Hospital and coming here to New York in a private setting. But this is the time and the age when there's so much going on. I've seen all the graphs and the charts on the declining venture capital and difficulty in raising money. I'm a firm believer if you have a great idea and you're able to generate good data, and you can really look at what does this data do and how can we get to a product that serves an unmet clinical need, that you will be financed both from grants and also from equity, and you'll be able to move forward just like we did. So we're 35 employees now, and we've got locations in Munich, New York, and we have a laboratory in Minnesota, which is a commercial laboratory, and we should be at FDA late 2013, early 2014 with our first product in prostate cancer. So it does work from nothing.
Fantastic. Colin.
Good morning, everyone. Colin Goddard. I, like George, am another biotech lifer. Came to the States in '85 at a postdoc at the NCI, and then ventured into this new world of biotech in, I guess, '89, up at a little company out on Long Island called Oncogene Science. Subsequently became OSI Pharmaceuticals. I joined it as a scientist. I joined it at a time when it was 19 or 20 people, and it had a research products business, had a diagnostic business, and had a therapeutics business. Pretty damn good. A lot of that needed to change over the years. I can tell you I am enormously privileged to have spent the vast majority of my career in a company like Regeneron that grew from very small roots into a successful commercial organization. When I joined, it already was public, but it had a market cap of about 15 million. When I left, which was at the time of the 4 billion acquisition of OSI Pharmaceuticals, as it became known, by a Japanese pharmaceutical company called Astellas, I'd had the last 12 years as CEO. I've made every mistake you can possibly make in this industry. We've done a few things right as well. We've had great deals, we've had bad deals. We raised a lot of money, $1.5 billion along the way of that journey. But without doubt, the greatest privilege I had was being at OSI and making, in fact, the pitch to our discovery collaborators at Pfizer a long, long time ago, trying to persuade them that EGFR was a target worth screening. We actually got them to do that as a control to a HER2 news screen, but that's all right, we're off and running. And by the end, I'd had the privilege of taking that whole journey through to a time where Tarceva, the outcome of that adventure, was a $1.5 billion a year product globally that really has filled an important role in the management and treatment of lung and pancreatic cancer patients. That's an incredible privilege. You learn a lot from the journey. After the acquisition, it was sort of sit back and decide what you want to do next. Well, I sat on some boards and decided that while pontificating was kind of interesting, really feel much of a need. So I went all the way back to the beginning, and I've now running a small company called Coferon, which had been spun out a little haphazardly out of Weill Cornell down the road, and has a fantastic discovery technology platform. It's a chemistry platform. We're in an era where perhaps it's not as easy to take those journeys as it was 20 years ago around a platform story. We think we can do so here, and after some interesting navigation, we were able to put together a Series B financing just 3, 4, 5 months ago, and we're off and running out on Long Island with a mighty 12 million of funds to try to do some great things. I love the industry. I love the adventure. I love the challenge of marrying science to business, to legal, to commercial, to risk-taking, risk assessment, and financing. But at the very heart of all of that, if the science isn't right, the rest doesn't matter. And that's where all of us who are interested in this space, interested in this industry, I think as potential entrepreneurs, people want to dive into the business environment. That's the one thing you can never forget as you take that journey.
So I'm going to represent a really different path. I probably could have equally sat on the earlier panel today. I was an academic scientist. I completed a postdoc and then started my faculty career at Harvard Medical School in the Department of Pathology. I worked there for 10 years, had a big program, many NIH grants, postdoc students, the whole thing. And I found myself wanting to be more translational and struggling to decide what was the right way for me to do that, right? There's many paths ahead of me, and I think our three CEOs here have really exemplified one path. And I decided that for myself, and at this stage in my career, I wanted to join an existing pharmaceutical company. I joined Eli Lilly, who had recently acquired ImClone, and I joined the ImClone faculty here in New York. That was a thoughtful decision. What ImClone had to offer, like Regeneron, is a real entrepreneurial biotech environment, one that's highly collaborative with academics. In fact, that's how I knew them as well. Had been a collaborator with ImClone for a while. And what Lilly had to offer was a very experienced and well-regarded pharmaceutical industry with all the bells and whistles that one would need to really immediately make an impact on, in this case, cancer therapeutics. So I think there are many paths open to you, and starting your own company is one, being part of a startup company is one, joining a larger organization is one, and I think understanding the differences and what the different types of jobs and roles out there are is probably a worthwhile endeavor.
Thanks, guys. That's a good point.
Thanks. Okay, so these are all very impressive stories, and you've had years of success and mistakes, things along the way. Now that we are living sort of in the current environment, let's say I want to start my own new company today. What are the things I need to know and do in the present?
Well, I'll make one important point. I do think, well, maybe a couple. I think that it is important, people talk about mission statements. I think it is important to decide what kind of company you want to build. I mean, what do you want to stay committed to? What do you want to believe in? I think that that's really important. Of course, you need a scientific technology and idea as well that's really going to give you sort of what makes you different and your competitive advantage. And one other thing, I heard Jim talk about, the situation now with raising funds and so forth. One thing that I've seen that to me is perhaps the biggest company killer, or at least the killer that prevents companies from achieving true long-term success, is the type of funding and the partners that you get in. And I think nothing can be more important than that. And I think that particularly my partner, Len Schleifer, who was the guy who really got us a lot of our funding, the most important thing that I think that we did was not become victims or slaves to the venture capitalists. Because you have to remember, the people who fund the company, if they don't share your vision, they have their own agenda. They want something out of it. And generally, they don't have the vision and the timelines in mind of what it really takes. I think that we're a rare success story. I'm not sure how many other fully integrated biopharmaceutical companies have been created and grown to be true success stories over the last 10 to 20 years. And one of the reasons for that is, as you said, getting past all the failures, building enough of an infrastructure that allows you to become successful. That really takes, if it takes 10 to 20 years to develop a drug, how long does it take to develop a company? And so if you get in bed with the wrong types of venture capitalists, they want, that's all they talk about, their exit strategy. You're talking about building a company, you're talking about building a future, you're talking about a vision, they're talking about how do I get out? And so you got to see that many times those are completely, contrasting and contradictory. So where you get your funding, the type of people you partner with, and trying to understand how to keep those visions as synchronized as possible, I think is key. Otherwise, you're going to be victim and totally at odds with the people who in some ways, control a major aspect of the company.
What do you think?
Yeah, it's such a great point on relationships and managing expectations. It always takes longer and it always costs more. And actually, it's interesting, going back to the last session, a lot of the failures are where the successes come from because there is no bad result. There's only the data. And often the data, when an experiment doesn't work out, that's the ultimate learning opportunity, which leads you down the path of fixing things and getting correctly aligned. But the VC community is tough. I've got a lot of friends in the VC community. We've got a terrific board. We've got both European and US investors in the company, and I spend a lot of time working very closely with them to make sure that we have an alignment of expectation. And that's absolutely critical. So often in a young business, you become so focused on dealing with the task at hand that you fail to communicate what's going on and what the vision is and where you're going to the owners of the company, who are also at risk. The venture groups they also have to report to somebody, and they have to meet their metrics, and they're under a lot of pressure as well. So if you respect that chain that everybody reports to somebody, and everybody has metrics of performance, and you try to make sure that you communicate what you're doing with your shareholders, it makes your life a lot easier. And you create a partnership with the owner rather than an adversarial relationship, which has taken many companies down, including my previous company, where I learned that lesson intimately. But I also think the other thing that comes to mind to me is constantly questioning yourself and creating an iterative dynamic with the people that surround you, who challenge you and require you to answer that basic question, which is, are we building a road to nowhere? What are we doing, and why are we doing it? You know, the road in biotech, in diagnostics and pharmaceutical is littered with the bodies of companies that built something that ultimately the market didn't want, no matter how good the technology is. So constantly asking yourself, what is the unmet need that we're trying to solve, and how does this product deal with that? And in order to answer that question, you have to look at a whole series of things, much of which you may not be familiar with, not just the data that you're generating in the technology, but other associative aspects like reimbursement, regulatory, commercial, all of those things. You've got to look at the entire pinwheel of event influencers that allow you to get down the path. And then once you identify that path, you drive like hell towards value creation and stay focused. And make sure that you hit those milestones and drive down the road. Absolutely critical.
I mean, I guess a couple of observations first and foremost is one that I feel very strongly about, and that is that when George and Lenny were building Regeneron and we were building OSI, I think it was during a period that we lived through as an industry of incredible largesse that we may never see again. This was a time where there was ample capital available to build these adventures, where people still believed there would be big rewards from building those adventures, where the industry was, by and large, open to a very favorable regulatory environment for the approval of new products, and where the payers had no real pressure on the pricing and reimbursement of the products you were creating. A lot of that's changed. That doesn't mean to say that it's still not a wonderful adventure to undertake to build a company in this space. In fact, I think it's every bit as exciting an adventure. It means, however, you've got to know what you're getting into, and you've got to have a very disciplined approach to this. And I think one of the first tests to sort of personalize some of the commentary, you've really got to think about whether you're that being. There's some fantastic scientific and medical minds in this room. Entrepreneurial corporate adventures may or may not be your thing. And I think one of the things that I've learned from speaking and counseling a lot of would-be entrepreneurs over the years is a lot of people think they know what that journey is like and think they want to make that jump, but aren't necessarily looking at that through anything other than rose-tinted spectacles. So really try to understand what it is. Because I tell you, if you have that aptitude, if it's something that fits you, it's the greatest adventure you'll have in your life.
Well, what's a couple of things you want people to know to decide if they're going to make that jump?
So yes, your research is important. Yes, your idea is important. typically understand that the value of that idea isn't as high as you think it is when you're talking to people to finance it out at the beginning. Don't lose sight of the idea, but understand that it's a multi-dimensional, as I used that phrase before, a multi-dimensional journey to turn that into value. And it isn't just about the science. The science is and should be preeminent in shaping the journey, but it isn't just about the science to turn that into success. It's going to require difficult decisions. It's going to require adjusting your thoughts and belief set about your passion and your idea, because this has to become a business. And you're undertaking a journey where you're learning from every piece of data that inputs, whether that's a business input or a financial input or whatever, and you have to adjust very quickly to that. Go ahead, George. Yeah.
You know, I totally agree with Colin's point about there's a lot of talent, there's a lot of brain power, there's a lot of different kinds of people. But it's absolutely true that I think it takes a certain kind of person to be able to really thrive. It is an adventure, but there are certain attributes that I see the successful people have. I mean, of course, anybody can be successful once or by luck, but if you're going to really go through the journey, just like Colin is saying, and I think you really have to look deep and explore yourself, and you have to say, you can't be risk adverse, you can't be failure adverse, and you have to be totally willing, sort of as Colin was getting at, to realize that, well, you got to admit, yeah, maybe it wasn't the best idea, it wasn't the right path, and I'm willing to change. And I think all these attributes are really necessary to enjoy the journey and the adventure and to ultimately succeed, because if you don't have those attributes, I think that it's going to be a tough road.
And how does that go for where you went?
Well, I was going to go back to the question about what mistakes are made, which I think was part of the question, and I was trying to think what the answer that I would give that would be both relevant to a small startup, to a biotech, and to an industry. And I think to understand this, you have to appreciate how complex it is to take an idea and develop a drug that treats patients. You know, there's so many complicated pieces of that process. To me, the biggest mistake that anyone makes is losing focus on the purpose, and the purpose is to make the lives of patients better. And that goes all the way back to making decisions that are too driven by commercial market size kinds of considerations, making decisions that are too driven on perceived competition in the marketplace. At the end of the day, you have to stay laser focused and dedicated and champion this idea, this product, this drug for the sake of patients. And just, I think if you keep your focus there, you'll avoid many, many of the mistakes that are made.
I think that's really important. I mean, at the end of the day, if you're going to take this adventure, you're going to undertake this journey, for goodness sake, don't lose sight of the moral compass that took you on that route. I think that's tremendously important, and it's a very useful barometer of where you are at any stage of the journey. And bang on, I agree with that completely. I will say one other thing about this whole choice at the very beginning. It's okay to recognize in yourself that maybe you're not that person, that you belong in academia doing brilliant research. That doesn't mean to say you can't participate. In fact, some of the best nurturing partnerships in early stage biotech are between the academics and the founder laboratories and the business-oriented team on the other side. They can be mutually rewarding experiences. So this isn't a black or white, I've got to go or I don't do it. This is where do I fit? What am I like, and how do I feel about that journey, and how I want to get involved? And it can be a simple handoff. Hey, here's this great technology. Let's go form a company. Good luck, guys. It can be as a sort of a key scientific collaborator, an SAB member, go through it, or it can be as the entrepreneur. And I think that choice is an important one. And the other thing about that, I suppose, is marrying what you don't know to someone who knows it, and having that shared mentoring, input, and advice very early on can be very useful.
So yesterday we had a very interesting session on the current scientific education, and I was wondering what would be your input on how would you change our academic training to better fit a life in industry and pharma?
Well, maybe this gets back at what Colin was just saying, which is, I think the most important thing is exposure. I mean, I think Laura made a great point, which Colin echoed about remembering the end game, and Ross at the beginning. So it's the patients, but it's also, I think, the science. And you have to be really, really well trained and rigorously trained in the science and understanding biology and mechanism if you're going to build a reproducible business. You got to have the right end game in mind. You have to consider but not get distracted by all these sort of, all the business side things, which I think people often overvalue and make wrong decisions on based on commercial input and ideas of market size and so forth and so on. So I think the most important thing should just be exposure. I think that the training should be as rigorous as possible. The people who do best, I've seen, in my business at our company, are the people, the more rigorously they're trained, the better they are. It doesn't matter what field they're in. The beauty of our business is you can transfer. As long as you're trained well and you can think rigorously and scientifically, you can transfer that. And that same thinking, I think, works at every aspect. As Laura said, there's a huge number of steps along the way. If you can think really well, you can apply the same basic principles to the problems that you encounter every step along the way. So the more rigorous the training and so forth, the better. The thing that I think was certainly lacking 25 years ago, when I was doing my training, though I do have to say through my mentor Fred Alt and his mentor David Baltimore, I was exposed to a lot of this at an early age. But I think exposure, seeing what's out there, seeing what the opportunities are there, seeing how companies form, get started, seeing how more mature companies work, what the opportunities are, understanding, where you could fit in, and thinking what kind of personality you have. Because I think Colin was making a great point. One phenomenal thing about industry is there really is almost room for anybody. I mean, if you don't want to be the biggest risk taker, I mean, you don't have to start a company, you don't have to put everything at risk, but there are opportunities that you can do and you can take on. And the other beautiful thing about companies is much of the time you can get people together who compensate, they take their strengths together, they compensate for their weakness. Somebody might not be a great presenter, but might be a great, think of great idea. Another person might be able to really present and sell the stuff. So people can compensate for each other. So it's a very different world. I really think it is. I mean, there's some of the features are the same and so forth. The people who really do well, I think, are the people who think well and who are trained well. But understanding what's out there, being exposed to it, hearing from people, going to visit, talking as much as you can, maybe even doing, having relationships like you heard. A lot of companies are open to relationships. Laura got involved in both not only collaborations with Regeneron, but apparently with ImClone, and that's how she built relationships there. So having those sorts of relationships with companies, I think, are increasingly very willing to have. That, I think, will at least open up, the window of opportunities.
So you guys are less concerned about having students and postdocs come out that have specific training in understanding therapeutics, things like that, Colin?
Ish. I think there are ways to bring into curriculum some vehicles that help foster that exposure, if you will. So, for example, I know it's rather informal, but it works kind of well. At Cold Spring Harbor Labs, they have an entrepreneurs club. And they get together and they're kicking out lots of good scientific ideas, and they'll invite in speakers, and they'll have forums that, give people the opportunity to do an elevator pitch, that give them the opportunity to develop a little business plan and pitch it and debate it and teach by action, if you will. Good thing about those is, I think, go back to this aptitude thing. An environment like that, courses like that, curricular modules like that, will weed out very quickly people who find that fun, right? And yeah, I completely agree. Got to have the right moral compass. I completely agree. Got to have the scientific focus. But it's got to be fun too, because it's too bruising a journey if it's not fun. And if you can create within a curricula an environment or a module or a unit that builds in that kind of exposure, I think a lot of people would benefit from that and learn.
I'd like to add one thing. I agree with everything that you've said. I think that rigor in your training and a very, very solid foundation in logic, in critical thinking, in the basics of biology and medicine are critical. I think exposure can help you choose the right path for yourself, and so it can kind of give you an idea of where you might fit in the world. But the one thing that I think maybe we haven't mentioned yet that is important is the ability to work in teams, which becomes essential in a company setting, which is not at all essential in an academic setting, and not really taught, and sometimes not even encouraged. And one struggle that I see people coming out of outstanding scientific training, where they struggle sometimes, is being a good team player and being able to be proud of your contribution to the team and lift the whole team, because those are the people who really succeed.
That's a great point.
Yeah, it is a very good point. I agree. Nicole on the Twitter and everything?
Yes.
Okay. So I just want to now throw out a question. One thing that you guys have in common is that you're here in New York. So how has that experience, how has being in New York helped? How has it hurt you? How has it affected your companies at all? For example, you are a company funded from Boston, but you're actually in New York, yeah? And you talked about, having connections in various cities. So
It's, New York is an amazing place. You've got to look both ways when you cross the street. You have to be active in everything you do.
do?
Well, I usually do. I get in trouble.
That's how you've made it so far.
That's so far, barely. It's actually a good metaphor for the venture-backed biotech companies, but there's so many resources here that we can take advantage of. There are so many academic centers, there are hospitals, there are, just going back to the last conversation, audit a course in the business school, see how those people think, what they look at. It's different. They look at different things, interesting observations, there are lectures. This type of forum is fabulous. We should be having these more and more and more, because it's clear that we have to bust through a lot of the silos which have been endemic in this business, because the only way we're all going to make it, we're all standing on the same ship, in this particular case with a shrinking amount of resources, is to hold hands and look at each other's skill sets. The downside of New York is it's expensive and there's no space. So you have to be comfortable living in a box. You have to be comfortable paying $5 for a cup of coffee. Taxi fares have just gone up. So, and that cuts both ways. We have a great time recruiting young people to New York because they want the New York experience. They watch Sex and the City, they want to come over here, they have the whole thing. And so we get a lot of young people that apply, which is great because that's where the innovation occurs. Jim Morrison, Jimi Hendrix, all these people, they were young people that made these things happen. And we want to encourage that in our company to create an environment where you can explore, experiment, make mistakes, et cetera, and create a young culture. The flip side of that is you also need the hardcore development experience from people who've been in the industry a long time. And it's very difficult to ask somebody that's living in Southern California to move their family and work in New York City. That's a completely different game. So it does cut both ways. But what I am seeing emerging now, especially as our company begins to become more advanced, is it's a lot easier for me to actually raise money in New York City because of the financial flow that is here. It's a subway ride away to get to a lot of the major financial institutions. Another interesting facet, I never hear any complaining from any of my venture groups about coming to New York, which is very nice. I hear complaining from some other areas in the country, but everybody wants to come to New York. So I do have a much heavier interaction with my investor groups who are constantly coming through, and we're having drinks, we're having dinners. I'm heavily into the ballet, so I've gotten everybody involved in the ballet. A lot of people have never seen that before. There's a cultural aspect here which you're not going to find anywhere that you can take advantage of. These things are tangible, leverageable things in this great city that we can use to support the activity that you're doing.
And if I could just, before I get to you guys, I just want to ask you, George, because I always think of Regeneron as one of the quintessentially New York companies, and you were certainly one of the earliest and one of the most important. Has that, because many of us think of Regeneron as a New York company, has that actually colored the nature of the company?
Yeah, no, absolutely, in that both Len and I, we're sort of born and bred New Yorkers. One of the reasons we kept the company or formed the company here was because we were both married to the area, literally. And we heavily drew upon New York institutions. In 1989, I actually came here to Mount Sinai, where I actually worked when I was in high school, by the way. But I went to all the New York institutions and I put up flyers in the elevators, recruiting. And we staffed everybody from the New York institutions. We're still heavily New York staffed in terms of almost everybody comes from one of the major institutions. It doesn't mean we don't go elsewhere, but there's a lot of New Yorkers. And we took advantage of the fact that up until recently, there hasn't been that much biotech in New York. So we always thought that we could get the best of the best. If you were interested in going to a biotech company and so forth in New York, you didn't have that many options. So we, I think, got a lot of the really good people from all the New York institutions. So it is absolutely true. I mean, you know, the core group, we're New Yorkers, and the people that have helped come in and build the company, a high proportion of them are also New Yorkers.
I think you're right. Sometimes it can be hard to recruit people from some parts of the country, but New York, I believe, trains 10 to 15% of all residents every year in America, and it's such a rich academic environment, and it's such a big city. I mean, we have 2 baseball teams, right? So if we have this population can absolutely support more biotech and industry than we have.
But they recruited you, yeah, and you've had.
Well, you know, I actually went to Columbia. And then I was coming from Boston, so that's not a big stretch.
True.
So our contrarian view on that just a little bit, I would say that for the 20 of the last 25 years, the New York area has been a massive disappointment in the world of biotech. It's been like a team of NBA superstars who can't quite play together, who never perform like they should do, who lose to Spain in the Olympics or whatever, right? And it really has. And if you think about it, you think about the constellation of NIH funding dollars that come into the metropolitan area. If you go out to east on Long Island, you've got Brookhaven National Labs, you've got Stony Brook, you've got Cold Spring Harbor, you've got all these wonderful medical schools and research institutions in Manhattan, and you go out into Westchester. This should have become one of the great epicenters of this industry in the world, and it hasn't. On the other hand, I see a kind of a really interesting new energy in the last 5 years, and I think that's to be encouraged and to be built and to be striven for, because there's some great things in this area. All the talent and intellectual horsepower is certainly there. We're starting to get some constellation of capital that keeps companies here and fosters them. But most importantly, we're starting to get some success stories. You know, starting with this guy here and OSI and other companies that are recruiting and retaining and providing jobs for larger numbers of people. So we have a fantastic opportunity ahead of us. And I think, whereas if you think about Boston and you think about San Francisco and you think about San Diego as a sort of an earlier stage hub maybe, there's a lot here that's all upside for this area, but we've got to go grasp it. And I think we have a little bit of a tendency to pat ourselves on the back and say it's all great. And I would say it all can be great, and we've got to make it great. And all the pieces are here. And 5-10 years from now, we should have a goal of making this area the quintessential capital of biotech.
Sure. Well, my sense is that New York has now decided they really are going to focus on this, and I expect things will change. Are there questions from the audience? You guys have a chance now to ask these guys. What do you think? Okay. All right. So how do you, I am so blinded up here.
Yeah, it's hard to see the audience. Are you guys still there?
We know there's an audience, but there's a general glow back. Yeah, please.
Hi. Just a question for both George and Colin, although I think Colin's in a unique position starting again. Starting companies over 25 years ago was a different environment totally. And the fact that both of your companies survived for a very long period of time is fairly unique and probably not the models that we're going to see going forward today. So the question I have for both of you is, what do you think are the models which are going to be successful? Because the street will not allow non-profitable companies for years to exist, et cetera, and things like that. Colin, you're facing that with a new startup company, so you probably have a lot of thoughts about that. But George, if you were starting again now, what would you be doing too, differently, because times have changed?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Times have changed, and the question is, can you do it again in this world where maybe people don't have the patience to watch you try to survive all these ups and downs? I think that it relates exactly. I was smiling when Colin was talking. It relates to the excitement that you have when you're starting something new, when you see the possibilities. And I can tell you, I encounter now both things that we're doing at Regeneron or people we have relationships with and so forth. There are so many exciting new opportunities. I mean, I don't see exactly what the end game is going to be in terms of how they're going to wind up, and it is hard to imagine that these companies are going to evolve to be true, FIBCOs as they call them and so forth. But they're going to be so exciting to be involved and to build value, to build new capabilities, new technologies, new ways to discover drugs or new associated technologies. And I think there's going to be enormous value in these things. As you say, probably the fate of most of these, if they are successful, is going to be some sort of acquisition. At the end of the day, they'll be acquired and so forth. But I think the excitement is still there. I mean, I see it so much in my current situation, where there are so many exciting opportunities. There's so many exciting reasons to be at a startup, and there's frankly no more, which is I'm sure why Colin went back to it, there's no more exciting time than when you're really starting something and you can see the potential and it's all there in front of you, and then you're going to have to deal with all the issues that are going to come up.
A couple of observations on that, and I would say first, let's be gloomy for 30 seconds. Yeah, there are disconnects now in the financing pyramid that we used to take for granted. There's angel money, but the angel money frequently gets disconnected from a VC or private equity piece or other mezzanine type of financing vehicle. The IPO markets are haphazard at best. Maybe that's to some degree because the kind of products we're offering the public markets, by the way, as companies. And then I think, Barbara, you're absolutely right. The time requisite on turning profitable in the public space has shrunk enormously. So you could get very depressed about that. Actually, I think the opportunity to try and navigate that journey is part of the challenge I kind of like. Maybe that's the masochist in me, I don't know. But it's still there as a possibility. And I think there's a number of things that are actually quite encouraging. For one, just as we all on the biotech side are trying to figure out how to deploy capital more efficiently and effectively in placing bets and furnishing those bets towards success. Pharma's trying to figure out how to do the same thing. They're actually trying to figure out how to get cost-effective innovation going, how to bring forward something that's perhaps not been as successful as they'd like from their vast internal research organizations, right? And I think there is a new source of capital emerging within this space on a scale that hasn't been there before, that different companies are trying to wrestle with how to solve true innovation, true entrepreneurial cultures to get things moving. And lots of people are trying to put capital to work in lots of places. Now, we have to be more cost effective. We have to be more disciplined on all of those things. But at the end of all of this, there's a simple phrase I will use, and that is 10 years ago, 15 years ago, pick it, 20 years ago, we have to remember that this is a business. We live in a capital markets environment. And it used to be that a lot more investors were prepared to be long-term greedy versus short-term greedy. And part of the problems with the capital markets today is there's a lot driven by short-term greed, and that just doesn't talk to our industry. I think that's a broader statement than that. So we got to find ways to get a story going, a mechanism going, a company going, a build going that gets people excited and more excited about the returns they can make by staying the course than flipping prematurely. I mean, that's the challenge. If we can create a journey and a level of excitement and a real gem of a company that starts to be nurtured and moving forward, I think it's still possible.
Cool.
Hi, my name's Brandon. I'm a PhD student here at Mount Sinai. And I just wanted to ask if you guys could give any kind of insight about the idea of, like, as a young scientist who has the opportunity to do, either academic work or industry work after completing my PhD, like, what are your comments about opportunities for new PhDs? Many of you commented about how your experience, you've been in on these companies from the beginning. Like, what's the difference between being in on a company from the very beginning versus entering a company from either a postdoc position or a staff scientist position? And the idea of mobility, is there upward mobility? Do you have to transfer between companies? Is that, what kind of comments might you guys have about that?
Well, I think that is one tremendous advantage of getting into something small, because your title doesn't really mean that much exactly. Your history doesn't mean that much. It's all right there for everybody to see. Are you producing? Are you delivering? Are you coming up with good ideas? Are you really, helping move the company? And then you can really move and grow with that company. I think that that's a tremendous difference, certainly from other structures from academia, that somebody with just a PhD or just a postdoc doesn't have to have a big title or whatever. If they're a difference maker, if they get into the right situation, there's no ceilings, there's no barriers. You can become a player. That's happened many times at Regeneron, where we've taken people who, on paper didn't have great credentials, but right away you could see that they were making contributions, and they would continue to make contributions, and they've become, vice presidents and senior vice presidents in short periods of time. I think that that's one huge advantage, but it depends, right, on finding the right environment, on finding the right company at the right stage, which is not always the easiest thing to do, but certainly the opportunities are there.
And don't be afraid to make a mistake. The key is to get into the game. You want to go in with your eyes wide open, but we need desperately talented, creative thinkers and people who are willing to learn when they come into the environment and grow into the skill set. And there are legions of opportunities out there. And it's just a matter of getting in the game and then keeping your eyes open and making sure that the game you're in is the right one. And if it's not, then you do a lateral move. But we had two young PhDs who were involved in the Exosome program from Mass General, who are now both directors of research on the corporate level. They own stock options. They've got decent salaries, and they're in the business planning meetings now. They're in the regulatory meetings. They're in the reimbursement meetings. They've gotten into development. They're still doing fundamental research because we always want to keep that going. But the opportunities are endless. It's just a matter if you keep your eyes open and you go for it.
I would say, though, that I don't think you would make a mistake in doing a postdoc and having that credential under your belt. You can still enter any of these companies, and at least at the pharma level, it's unusual to hire someone without that a little bit higher degree in education, so it's something to consider.
And just very briefly, because we're going to wrap up, because you have a special take on this, academic versus industrial postdoc?
I think that's probably less important. What's important is that your postdoc enables you to become an independent scientist. It's unusual to finish your PhD and be completely prepared to do that. That you do good science, and that you get the same benefits out of that postdoctoral experience as far as publications, speaking opportunities to really become an expert, a deep expert in something.
Cool. Now, unfortunately, we have to wrap up. But thank you guys very much. I'm just going to say just a couple words. And so what I heard today was, I thought, very wise counsel. Know yourself and your motivations. I think maybe that's the most important. If entrepreneurship is for you, you should know that. It's a bit of a buzzword now. It takes a certain amount of almost blind optimism. But if you have that, I think it can actually be a lot of fun. Do you like risk? Do you like group science? And the other thing I heard that I think was perhaps also key is to identify a mentor, somebody that you can learn from. I know when we started our company, my partner and I probably took at least a dozen lunches with various people who had experience to just explain to us what was even involved. And that goes to my point of learn how it can be done. So it's a difficult road, but it can be a fun road if that's the way you're wired. So I just want to thank the people here on the panel. It's really a great discussion.